As a realtor myself, I'm going to share with you something most realtors don't want you to know. That is, you do not have to hire a buyer agent to successfully purchase a home. You can absolutely represent yourself in a real estate transaction, and there can be a lot of good reasons for doing so. That's really the point of this video. Is I want to talk through what are the potential benefits to representing yourself rather than hiring a buyer agent. Of course, I also want to lay out, well, what are some of the risks of doing so? Why might it make sense to hire a buyer agent? There's a lot of other similar videos to this on YouTube, but the thing is, most of them are created by real estate agents. And of course, the kicker is, of course, you should hire an agent because it is so risky and you could never, ever handle this transaction by yourself. And that's where I, apart from most of my colleagues, disagree. I actually think that most home buyers do possess the competency to successfully represent themselves. So I want to try and lay things out so that you can decide, does self-representation make sense for you? And if it does, then I'll lay out the steps and the categories that you should be considering when representing yourself. And if you decide that, yeah, that does sound too risky and too scary, hey, there's a lot of great agents out there. I'm not against those folks, but I do think that consumers should have the choice. And I don't think that you should be scared into hiring a buyer agent just because some other agent who was desperate to make a commission told you that you could never do this on your own. So let's start with the benefits. Why would you want to represent yourself? And let's not beat around the bush. Cost is the biggest one. Now, for years and years, decades, in fact, there was this misnomer that buyers don't pay for the buyer agent, sellers do. And so buyer agents would pitch their services as though they were free to home buyers. And a lot of agents still kind of try to do this. And that was the whole point in many ways of the lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors back in 2024. This has come up many, many times in the history of real estate where buyer agents are not fully disclosing or being transparent about the ways that they are compensated. But the thing is that buyer agents have never been and never will be free. Even if a seller is willing to make a concession to cover a buyer agent's commission, it's still the home buyer who is bringing all of the money to the table. And that cost of the buyer agent, one way or another, gets baked in to the sale price of the home. By having a buyer's agent, buyers are paying more for their homes in transaction fees. So we got to get away from this whole sleight of hand. Whether it's that the price of the buyer agent is just built into the price of the home, or whether it's a buyer that's paying their agent out of pocket, it is the buyer who, one way or another, is compensating their agent. And it is really, really important for consumers to recognize that. And that is the number one benefit to representing yourself, is that you are able to reduce transaction costs, both for yourself and for a seller, which generally saves you between 2.5% to 3% on your next home, which is a huge deal because when we're talking $700,000-$800,000 homes, which is common, especially in most of the coastal cities throughout the United States, oftentimes even more than that. I mean, that's over $20,000 in any transaction. That's not exactly chump change for most people. So the number one benefit to learning how to represent yourself is that you reduce transaction costs, save money, or you're able to make your offer more attractive than somebody who does have a buyer agent that they're expecting a seller to pay, because you're able to allow the seller to net more without you spending any extra money. This is the number one reason that people come to me to learn about self-representation and buying homes without buyer's agents, is because housing affordability is at an all-time low. They're wondering, how do I get an edge? Well, self-representation is the number one way that you can get at least a financial edge in real estate transactions. But setting finances aside, the other reasons why you might want to represent yourself is because it gives you greater control over the home buying process. This is something that a lot of folks that I talk with get really frustrated by. They feel out of control when buying a home because they are totally at the mercy of their agent and the way their agent represents them. And when you think back to like kindergarten, the game of telephone that you'd play in your class where one person starts with a message and then they whisper it into the ear of the next kid and then the next kid and the next kid. By the time it's gone through 15 kids, the original message just totally garbled, like unrecognizable. Well, unfortunately, this game happens a lot in residential real estate where you, as the home buyer, want to communicate something to the seller. But the way to do that is that you need to tell your buyer agent, this is what I want. And the buyer agent tells that to the listing agent, and then the listing agent tells that to the seller. And you are at the mercy of those intermediary parties communicating what it is that you wanted to say and doing so in a way that's actually reflective of your desires. And unfortunately, there's a lot of times that just like that kindergarten class game of telephone, the message gets garbled and your desires are not communicated the way that you want them to be or in as timely of a manner. And so you feel like I'm not in control of communications. Scheduling can get difficult because you're not only at the mercy of your schedule, but also of your buyer agent's schedule, their ability to communicate timely or to schedule things with the listing agent and the seller. Basically, having any additional parties to the transaction is going to create complications. Now, you have no control over whether or not the seller has an agent, but you can control whether or not you have an agent. And if you remove the buyer agent piece, well, then you know exactly what's being communicated to the seller or to their agent because you are the one who's doing those communications. You are the one who is scheduling things. You are the one who's making it happen. And making it happen, being in the driver's seat, that's all part of control. And then another reason is that with traditional buyer agents and the way that they are compensated, a lot of consumers have a hard time trusting the advice of their agent because the incentive structure is so inherently misaligned. What do I mean by that? Well, your traditional buyer's agent only gets paid if you buy a home. If you don't buy a home, they're just driving around showing you houses completely for free. It's a giant waste of their time. And the more money you spend, the more money they make. So if your budget is somewhere between $700,000 and $800,000, well, if they push you towards the $800,000 home and they get a 3% commission, that's $3,000 more that they're going to make because you spent $100,000 more. And while in the grand scheme of things, that might not be a ton of money, it's also not insignificant. And it just creates enough of a seed of doubt to say, does my agent actually want to find the very best home for me? And especially if you've spent months and months looking at homes with the agent, are they getting frustrated by the amount of time that they've spent with you without receiving any sort of compensation or commission? Is it going to ever get to the point where they're just like, this house is great, it's perfect for you, you should buy it, and where they actually start to push you into the transaction, push you towards the house? And this sadly does happen a lot. And a lot of home buyers, they just don't want to deal with it. They don't want to have somebody who is financially incentivized to get them to buy a home and to spend as much as possible, right? It just doesn't make sense. And that's one of my biggest gripes against the way that traditional buyer agency is set up, is that the incentive structure is misaligned between home buyers and their agents. And so other folks like you that recognize that, you may be saying, yeah, I don't want to do that whole song and dance. Let me just represent myself. And really, all of this can just be summed up under efficiency, right? Like representing yourself makes a more financially efficient transaction because there's one less service provider to be paid. It makes it more efficient in terms of communications and scheduling because there's one less person to have to involve in all of that. And it makes it, I think, more efficient for you when it comes to decision making because you're not having to bounce ideas off of somebody who is financially incentivized to get you to move forward on a home. You can decide at any point, this isn't the right home for me, or this isn't even the right time for me to be buying a house, and you can do so absolutely guilt-free. All right, what are the risks or the downsides? Why would you want to have a buyer's agent? And the biggest one is frankly the legal and financial side of it. Like when you're buying a home, when you make an offer, you are entering into a purchase and sale agreement or a contract with real liabilities. Like if you don't adhere to contractual deadlines, you could lose your earnest money, or worse, you could be sued for specific performance, and a court could order you to move forward with the purchase of a home. These contracts are no joke. And this is the number one thing that home buyers get intimidated by, is they fear, I don't know what's in those contracts. That is a huge stack of papers, and there's got to be some sort of gotcha in there. And the hope is that by hiring a buyer agent, they're going to be saved from that gotcha moment and potentially, not lose out on $10,000 or whatever it is of earnest money. Now, I do think that this risk gets overblown because the reality is buyer agents are not attorneys. These are people that have done 90-ish hours of real estate education. Yeah, they've got some continuing education, but it takes less educational hours to become a real estate agent than it does to become a barber. So it's not like these are highly specialized people on the whole. They really can't give legal advice. Yes, they should know their real estate contracts, but as soon as those waters start to get murky, you're going to have to get real estate attorneys involved anyway. Now, can they do a good job of keeping you on a timeline, making sure that you're adhering to the contractual deadlines? Absolutely. A good agent should do that. And if you're somebody who is very disorganized, if you struggle to keep up with that kind of stuff, maybe it's worth it to hire a buyer agent. It may also just be worth it to hire a personal secretary for a month, way less. But I digress. That is the number one risk and reason that people would hire an agent, is because they are concerned about the legal and financial risks of buying a home without one. The other possibility of why you would maybe want to hire an agent is that you fear missing out on potential homes. And while the Zillows and Redfins of the world do have 98% of all available listings online on their platforms, there are those 2% of, whether it be off-market listings or just where a good agent who's in the business full-time, they have their ear to the ground. They know who's thinking about selling soon. They're able to play some matchmaker, which is the definition of a good broker. A broker is a matchmaker between somebody who wants to sell something and somebody who wants to buy something. And I don't want to undervalue what that means, especially in hyper competitive markets where inventory is really low. Now, throughout most of America, that's not what we're facing anymore. Now, most places are shifting towards being a buyer's market, where buyers have much more leverage and power, and where sellers are trying to get as much visibility as possible. But if there's something very specific that you are looking for, or you're in neighborhoods that are hyper competitive and where not all homes hit the market, it may be worth hiring a buyer agent, somebody who's really experienced, has their ear to the ground or finger on the pulse of a local market, and that's going to be able to bring you some of those potential off-market deals. And then the final one is that you may want to hire an agent simply because, as of right now, the real estate industry is extremely resistant to change. And sadly, I hate this, but self-represented buyers do tend to have a harder time getting a fair shake from listing agents. It's because most listing agents are also buyer agents, and they look at self-represented buyers as both a threat to their livelihood, and unfairly, they look at them as riskier buyers. This is unfortunate because there are a lot of really incompetent buyer agents out there who blow up deals left and right. But some listing agents still believe that having any buyer agent, no matter how incompetent that person is, automatically makes a buyer more qualified than a highly competent self-represented buyer who does things like what you're doing and watching YouTube videos, learning about the process. So there is some bias. I would even go as far as calling it discrimination within the traditional real estate realtor world against self-represented buyers. And that can be really, really frustrating when you come up against that. Should that be a reason that you need to spend an extra 2.5 to 3% on your home by hiring an agent? I don't think so, but sometimes desperate times call for desperate measures. And at least until this industry changes, there may be some of you that just decide, all right, if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. And these are just the established rules. I want a house. I'm just going to bite the bullet. Sad as that is to say. So, those are, at least at a high level, the benefits that I see to going at it as a self represented buyer compared to the risks. And now you've really got to decide, okay, is it worth it to me to represent myself? And if you do decide that it's worth it to you, first, I just encourage you to pause and click the subscribe and the like button so that we can reach more people who decide, yeah, self-representation is the clear choice for me. That's what this DIY Homebuyer channel is all about, creating a community of self-represented buyers and creating high quality resources that equip buyers to succeed in real estate transactions without having costly buyer's agents. And now I'll just give you a quick rundown of, okay, what are these steps to successfully representing yourself? What does the process look like? And first and foremost, it starts with getting your financial ducks in a row. There's no point getting excited about homes, going out and looking at things until you know what you can reasonably afford, and not just like maximally what you're approved for, but what you can comfortably afford. So really, truly, the first step, unless you are a cash buyer and just have the money set aside, if you are going to be financing your home at all, the very first step in the process is to get connected with a good lender, somebody who is going to be a partner to you, both in your financial goals and in your home buying journey. There are many, many good lenders who are out there, but the main thing is that they take an interest in who you are. They understand what you're trying to do as a self-represented buyer, and they really help you understand the financial picture of what are things going to look like. Yes, of course, your principal and interest on your mortgage payment, but helping you understand the implications of taxes and HOA fees, insurance, the real cost of home ownership. A good lender is going to help break down those things for you. And once you have a clear picture of here's what I can reasonably afford, then that is your ticket to actually starting looking at homes. But even before yes, you've got your pre-approval, but then the next step before you just start saving every home that you see on Zillow, really starting to research the areas and the neighborhoods that you want to live in. Area, location, you've heard it so many times before, but it is so true. Real estate long term, it is all about location. And there are too many people that they just get wrapped up in the beautiful, pretty houses and interior features and whatnot, but they don't think critically enough about where it actually is that the house is located and where they're going to be living. And frankly, this is one of the downsides in many ways of having a buyer agent. I get fair housing, and I am a huge advocate for fair housing. Don't, please don't misunderstand me there. But real estate agents cannot talk much about crime or about schools or a lot of the questions that you frankly have, no matter who you are, where you're coming from. Those are kinds of questions that you want to just know about. Okay, what direction is a neighborhood headed in terms of being a safe and secure place to live, which is what everybody ultimately wants. Realtors are going to be limited in what they can say there. And so you, as a self-represented buyer or not, need to do your own due diligence. And so that is looking at crime reports. You can call local police or sheriff departments and ask about what's happening crime-wise, looking at school ratings. I really like looking at Reddit forums or niche.com and just seeing seeing what different neighborhood reviews are, what's happening in different areas, getting a local feel. I avoid Nextdoor because it's usually just the complainers of the world that are griping on there. But Reddit generally tends to be a great spot to look if there's certain cities, neighborhoods, areas where you can get good feedback from people that live in those areas. But you really want to limit the scope of your housing search to a few neighborhoods that you determine, yeah, this is where I would want to be for at least 5 years plus. Yeah, life can happen, but generally, when you're buying a home, to really see any sort of appreciation, you're thinking at least on a 5 year timeline. So define your area first. Then you can set up your home search on Zillow, Redfin, whatever your platform of choice is. And yeah, I say be specific in your area, but when it comes to your housing search, try and keep that criteria pretty wide because there's some real diamonds in the rough. You might set your search criteria as a 4 bedroom, but really all you need is a 3 bed and an office. Well, if you set it as a 4 bedroom, then you're going to miss out on a true 3 bedroom with an office. So anyhow, there are some of those things. I just keep your search as open as possible and then really start flagging the homes that you like. And when you find a home that you like, you want to look on that online platform website for the listing agent information. Never, ever, ever click the schedule a tour button because what that's going to do, it's going to set you up with a buyer agent who is paying top dollar to Zillow or Redfin or whoever to get your contact information. So don't do that. As a self-represented buyer, what you're doing is you're reaching out to the listing agent directly, and you will find their contact information. It's going to say their name, their brokerage, and it usually will have their phone number and email. And you're just going to reach out to that person and let them know, hey, I saw this listing on this website. I'm really interested in it. I'm going to be representing myself, but I'm pre approved with this lender. Happy to get you anything that you'd need to know, but I would like to ask you some questions and I'd like to set up a time to tour the house. Usually, if you're respectful and if you show that you've done some due diligence, that you're not just a slouch who's calling up demanding a showing, but that you have gotten pre approved and that you just show you're respecting their time, most of the time, listing agents are going to respond well to that. I'll create other videos to talk about what happens if a listing agent doesn't respond well to that initial conversation. But assuming that they do, you're going to show up, tour the house, take stock of what do you like, what do you not like, be looking out for potential issues with the home, be really looking around the neighborhood, getting a feel for that, thinking through things like commutes, what are the local amenities. But then assuming you like the home, well, it's time to put together an offer. Usually here, this is where the listing agent can help. The listing agent is to treat you as a customer, not as a client. That is the key distinction. So you can have a non-agency disclosure that you sign with the listing agent that just says, hey, you don't represent me, but in service to the home seller, you're treating me as a customer. And one of the things a listing agent can do for you as a home buyer and a customer is provide the standardized forms for making an offer. And they can perform the clerical duties of helping you fill those out. Now, they can't give you advice on how to make the offer. All of that has to be determined by you, but they can offer basic definitions and just make sure that you've dotted your I's and crossed your T's all within reason. At this point, too, you can also hire a real estate attorney to go over those documents with you, and that person can give you advice and counsel. There's a number of different things that you can do as you're preparing to make an offer. So at the same time as you're thinking through the offer, you're also wanting to put together a comparative market analysis. This is something that's quite easy to do using, again, Zillow, where you just look at within a half mile or so, or within the similar neighborhood, what are other homes that are currently active, what homes are pending, and what's recently sold in the last 6 months that's comparable. And what do those active, pending, and sold sales communicate or indicate about the home that you're thinking about buying? Is the home you want to buy wildly overpriced, comparatively underpriced? Does it fall right in line? That's the best way to get a sense of what the house is actually worth. So it's in your offer as well that you're going to include your contingencies, things like your inspection contingency, financing and appraisal contingency, title contingency, things to do with surveys, or if you're on property, if there's well tests or septic. Those things might be a little bit property specific, but it's in your offer that you include those contingencies or protections for yourself. And then the negotiations happen. There may be a little bit of back and forth before you're able to come to terms. But once the seller has accepted your offer, congratulations, you're in contract. And now it's the escrow period. And the escrow period is where you perform your due diligence. You have your home inspection. If there are any repairs that need to be made, you can negotiate those. It's where your lender does all of their underwriting and due diligence. They have the appraisal, and you're in just communication with your lender and with the title company. They're there to help walk you through it all the way up until closing day, when you do your final walkthrough to make sure that everything is as advertised before you sign, send the money, get the keys. It really is that straightforward. It's not nearly as scary or as intimidating as many agents, unfortunately, like to make it sound. So that is the overview of the process, as well as, at least at a high level, the benefits and potential risks to representing yourself. I would love to hear from you, though. What questions does this create? Do you feel encouraged to represent yourself? Or after hearing about the process, do you feel like, that is way more than I want to take on, and it would be worth it to hire an agent? And if it is worth it to hire an agent, at what cost? At what fee? Is it reasonable? Anyway, I love seeing the discussion that happens in comments like this. I will engage as much as I possibly can, and I will look forward to seeing you in the next one. In the meantime, happy home buying.